In 2021, Hungary adopted a new law restricting civic space and NGOs' freedom of association. How did we get to this point? Everything started in 2017, when Hungary adopted its first anti-NGO law. In theory, the law was about the transparency of NGOs, but it actually introduced very abusive reporting requirements for these NGOs. For example, the law imposed the publication of personal data of all donors, and if this was not bad enough, the law also required NGOs receiving funds from foreign countries to add the label funded from abroad in all of their public documents and on their website. The 2017 Hungarian law was very inspired by the Russian 2012 Foreign Agents law, and it had the same stigmatization effect. The European Commission challenged the law before the Court of Justice of the EU, and the court concluded in 2020 that this law violates EU law. In particular, they found that it violated freedom of association and freedom of movement of capital. Most importantly, the court stated that access to funds and freedom to manage funds in an independent way is a fundamental aspect of freedom of association. As a consequence, member states cannot adopt measures that are contrary to this right. After the ruling of the court in 2021, Hungary withdrew the law. However, at the same time, the country adopted a new law that introduces similar restriction on NGOs' freedom of association. In practice, Hungary gave power to the State Audit Office to do the auditing of NGOs receiving more than a certain amount of money in donations. According to the law, the State Audit Office is free to start any investigations if they wish. It is important to remember that the State Audit Office is known in Hungary for conducting abusive investigations against opposition parties and ordering them to pay back the funds they received from the state during electoral campaigns. In addition, the State Audit Office's reports are public, and such publicity has been used to attack the reputation of opposition parties during election campaigns. At Reclaim, we have conducted an extensive legal analysis of the new law and the working methods of the State Audit Office. We concluded that the new law represents a misleading form of compliance with the ruling of the Court of Justice, which ordered Hungary to cancel the 2017 law. In our assessment, we argue that the new law introduces restrictions on civil society organizations that reinforce the chilling effect that the previous law established. In fact, Hungarian NGOs that advocate for good governance and human rights, and in general for topics that are not aligned with the government agenda, like, for example, the reception of migrants and LGBTQI rights, these NGOs may fear to be a target of abusive investigations and endless auditing control by the state audit offices. All these procedures have the obvious purpose of draining the resources of the organizations, pushing them to focus on administrative work instead of fighting for human rights. In other words, with the new law, the Hungarian government is managing to reach its goal, restricting space for civil society and political opposition via abusive investigations, and at the same time pretending to be respecting its EU law obligations. We call on the European Commission not to fall into the trap and to go back to the Court of Justice, asking it to impose financial penalties on Hungary for not respecting the previous ruling of the court. It is extremely important at this time to act and for the Commission to prove that it will not accept these misleading efforts. Other member states are also adopting laws that restrict civic space. Poland, for example, is now considering adopting a law that follows the same path as the Hungarian one, again building upon a narrative of NGOs receiving funds from abroad as agents serving foreign interests, the same narrative that was used in Russia in the last decade. It is time for the European Union institutions and member states to take firm decisions against legislative measures that are only aimed at violating freedom of association and expression and to limit political opposition. If you want to learn more about Hungary's 2021 anti-NGO law, check the link to our legal assessment of the law in the description down below. And have a look at these videos we have selected for you with background on anti-NGO legislation in Hungary and Russia.